uh, that in the 1948 is the year Israel was established. What's the name? Nothing, I never. You didn't know. I was going to say to write it down, but really not. And that's the number always. Always, yeah. And so you don't have any problem now. So I don't answer. Hello. Hello. So I just checked Waze. Yeah. And quarter to 12 downstairs. At quarter to 12, yeah, they got it. Okay. Yeah, yeah, okay, all right. Okay, and I have your bandages already in the car. Oh, I see. You took the bag. Yeah, yeah, Mommy said, yeah, yeah, you took the bag. Yeah. Thank you very much. No problem. Okay, what things at home? Everything all right? Perfect. Okay then. Thank you. Bye. Yes, 8 people on it already. What did you learn? Nothing. Perfect. There's 8 people on it. One Hannah, is that Hannah? Hannah Helps? Yeah, something. Check the picture. I wonder if Saria.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello, he hasn't come on board yet. I'll wait till the mic's muted.
Interesting that I always finish. I told you why. Because if Helen puts it on, she will be first. If Ling puts it on, you first. I put it on early. You have. I'm talking about. You put it on late yesterday. You still do it. Okay, yeah. You are the person who belongs to the thing comes first. At Link's house, Link's put down the thing and
Good evening, everybody, and good afternoon, and good morning. I hope you're all keeping well. This week's shiur is generously sponsored by Janie Fixler and Faye Kingsley in loving memory of their late father, A. Pataznik, alav hashalom, Abba Tzvi ben Yaakov Koppel, alav hashalom, whose yahrzeit is on Shabbat, the 25th of Tevet. So thank you to Janie and Faye. I don't know if you're with us this evening or you're going to be listening on the recording as you often do, but thank you very much. And the topic of this evening's shiur is learning from turning at the burning bush, which is what happens when I decide the topic of a shiur before consulting with my wife. But either way, I like the title, and I hope that you'll enjoy the shiur either way, because I believe that the sneh, Moshe's encounter with Hashem at the sneh, is one of the most powerful passages in our Torah and clearly a turning point in Jewish history. So let's see what happened in source number 1. Moshe was shepherding the flock of his father-in-law Yitro, the priest of Midian. And he led the sheep after away to the wilderness. And he arrives at the mountain of Hashem to Chorev. And what happens there, as we know? An angel of Hashem appeared to him in this fire inside the sneh. And Moshe saw. This bush was burning in fire, but it was not being consumed. Moshe. So how does Moshe respond to this strange appearance that he's out there tending his flock in the wilderness and there's this fire in a bush? He says, Asura na ve'ereh. I will turn now and I will look at Amareh Hagadol Hazeh, at this great scene. Moshe says, wow, there's a fire and it's not consuming the bush. I'm going to turn and I'm going to see what's going on. Madua lo yivar hasneh. Why is this bush not being consumed? And there appears to have been something really important and significant about Moshe turning to look at the sneh. Because in the very next pasuk we are told, Vayar Hashem kisar lirot. Hashem saw that Moshe turned to look, and as a result, Vayikra elav Elokim mitoch hasneh. Hashem called out to him from within the sneh, Vayomer, and he says, Moshe, Moshe, a term of endearment, repeating his name. Vayomer, and Moshe responded, Hineni, here I am. And the Midrash in source number 2 picks up on the way which I have read these psukim, which was influenced by this Midrash, which makes it seem that Moshe's decision to turn was a key turning point. In source number 2, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amarish, Lakish said, Hafach panav, Moshe turned his face around, vihibit, and he looked. Shne'emar, as it says, Vayar Hashem kisar lirot, Hashem saw that he turned to look. Chayvan shebit bo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Amar na'ez ze lirot et Yisrael. Seeing as he looked, Hashem says, wow, this guy is appropriate to be the shepherd for my flock Israel. And I would like to ask the following question. Surely any of us who were out in the wilderness, who saw a bush on fire, would turn our heads to have a look. Isn't that the normal thing for a human being to do? To turn and look when there's a fire nearby? And especially when there's something mysterious going on, that the bush is on fire and it's not being consumed and it doesn't look like a normal fire. We might look a little bit closer. What was so special and significant and impactful about the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu turned to look, that this became the turning point in his career, in Jewish history and his life, that Hashem says, you turned around to look, you are now going to be the shepherd of my people. And so we continue in the very same midrash to have a different understanding of this phrase. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak said, Mahu kisar le'rot. What does it mean that Moshe turned to look? It doesn't just mean that Moshe turned to look, because I think all of us would have done that. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem said, Sar v'za'afhu. Sar v'za'af means that he's pained, he's angered, it hurts him. Zeh, lirot b'tzaran shel Yisrael, to see the pain of the Jews b'Mitzrayim in Egypt. Lefichach, therefore, ra'ui hu liyot ro'eh aleihen. He is appropriate to be a shepherd over them. Miyad, and immediately, vayikra elav Elokim mitoch hasneh. Hashem called out to him from the bush, vayomer, and he said, Moshe, Moshe. Rabbi Yitzchak explains that when it says that Hashem saw Moshe turning, it wasn't just an expression of Moshe at that moment, at that point in history, turning to look at a bush on fire. Moshe turning was the way that Moshe behaved, and Sar elsewhere in Tanakh is an expression of feeling pain. Moshe was pained to see what was going on. As we saw in source number 3, what was Moshe doing there in the first place, far away from Mitzrayim? It was because in source number 3, Vayihid bayamim hahem, it was in those days, Vayigdal Moshe, Moshe grew up in the house of Paro. Vayetzei elechav, he went out to his brethren, Vayar besivlotam, and he saw their suffering. Moshe could have walked past, but Moshe was somebody who was sar lirot. He turned to look at what was going on. He didn't just walk past the suffering of others. He wasn't apathetic to the suffering of others. And in that context, Vayar ish mitzri makeh ish ivri me'achav, he saw an Egyptian striking a Hebrew man of his brothers. So we can explain that Moshe turning by the bush wasn't just about Moshe turning at that point. Hashem saw that Moshe is somebody who turns and pays attention to suffering, as doesn't just keep walking on as if there's nothing to see here. Now I'd like to return in a few minutes' time to the choreography of Moshe's movements by the snare. But before we do that, in order to understand the choreography a little bit more, I'd like to understand what actually happened at the snare. This is the very first time that Hashem is appearing to Moshe. This is their first conversation. Moshe is going to go on to become our greatest prophet who has ever lived and ever will live. So how did it all start? How did Moshe start off in his journey of prophecy? Rabbeinu Bachya in source number 4 explains how this happened, and my apologies to the women who learned this Rabbeinu Bachya with me already on Monday morning. But I think it's relevant to remind ourselves of this Rabbeinu Bachya in this context. And he says, Inyan ha-parsha hazot, ki Moshe hisig shlosha inyanim. He says we need to understand that Moshe seeing Hashem by this burning bush happened in 3 separate stages. It wasn't just one vision that he saw. Ve'eluhem, these are they. Number one, ha'esh, Moshe saw fire. Number two, hamalach, then he saw an angel. Number three, v'hashchina, then he saw the divine presence itself. At the beginning, he saw the fire, which was there, kindling inside the bush. Ve'ein haseh nisraf, and the bush was not being burnt. And that form of vision, there was nothing prophetic about it, nothing special. He saw that with normal human eyes, the normal faculty of sight in pure daylight while he was awake. Moshe saw fire. That's stage number one. However, after seeing that fire, his intellectual faculties were strengthened, which enabled him to see an angel, which is a higher level of sight, of seeing. And after being able to perceive the angel, then he saw with a prophetic vision the glory of the Shekhinah. And Rabbeinu Bachya brought psukim for each of these stages to show in the text how this can be seen, how Moshe first saw a fire, then he perceived an angel, and then he reached prophetic visions. And he explains that this was necessary. Because now this was the beginning of Moshe's prophecy. Hashem wanted to educate him slowly, or to dedicate him slowly. Chinuch in Hebrew isn't just to educate, but it's also to dedicate something to a new purpose. To elevate him from one level to the next, until he'd be able to perceive Nevuah. So what I want us to remember in the context of this evening shiur is that the revelation by the snare was a gradual revelation where Moshe was eased into the experience, and Hashem slowly but surely built up Moshe's capacity and prophetic vision. And at the bottom of page 1, Rabbeinu Bachya gives us a mashal, a parable. What can we compare this to? If somebody's sitting in a dark house for a long time, we think about miners in this context, when spending a long time in the mine, and they come out into daylight. If suddenly you come out and you're exposed to direct sunlight, then your vision is going to be impaired. You have to look at the light one bit by bit until you're used to it. Like this is the case with sunlight. It is the same thing when experiencing and exposing ourselves to the bright light of Hashem, to seeing the Shekhinah. It needs to be a gradual process, so it's not a blinding process for us. Now, I don't know if you've ever considered this question before. What did Hashem sound like at the snare? What did Hashem's voice sound like? If you are the person who is responsible for screening the play of the scene of the burning bush, and you need to tell the actor who's doing the voice of Hashem, which is quite a kavod to give to somebody, what they should sound like at that moment when Hashem calls out, Moshe, Moshe. What did Hashem's voice sound like? And I've mentioned this before because it's one of my favorite midrashim, but I think it's relevant here because it shows us again the way that Hashem gradually and easily brought Moshe into the world of Nevuah at the snare. Amar Rabbi Yeshua Kohen bar Nechemia. It says in source number 5 in the Midrash in Shmot Rabbah. B'sha'ah shenigla HaKadosh Baruch Hu al Moshe, when Hashem initially revealed himself to Moshe, Tiron haya Moshe linvoah. Moshe was a first timer to prophecy. Tiron, like tironut in modern Hebrew. That's your basic training for the army. Moshe was taking his first baby steps in prophecy. And Hashem said to himself, I don't know. What voice should I use? Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem said, Im niglani alav b'kol gadol, if I appear to Moshe with my big, booming God voice, ani mavato, I'm going to terrify him. I don't want to scare the fellow who's out with his sheep in the wilderness. B'kol namuch, but if I appear to Moshe with a soft voice, a low voice, a gentle voice, bosehu ala nevuah, that's below prophecy. That's disrespectful for prophecy. Prophecy needs to be in an impressive voice. So you almost have this image, kiviyachol lahavdil, of Hashem standing in front of a mirror, practicing his voices, choosing which voice he's going to use when he calls out to Moshe. Ma'asa, what did he do? Nigle elav b'kolo shel aviv. Hashem appeared to Abraham with his father's voice. Hashem called out with the voice of Amram. Amar Moshe, and Moshe hears his dad's voice. He says, Hineni ma'aba ma'akesh. Yes, Dad, what do you want? Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem said, Eini avicha, I'm not your father. Ela Elokei avicha, it's close. I'm the God of your father. Bepitui bati elecha, I came to you in an enticing way. Kedei shelo tityareh, I didn't want to scare you. So Hashem is doing everything not to scare Moshe. I find this to be a hugely powerful midrash, because I believe that it's not only Moshe Rabbeinu, but I believe that we all hear Hashem's voice in the voices of our parents. Hashem is Avinu Malkeinu. He is our father and he is our king. How do we perceive Hashem as being Malkeinu? We think of him in terms of our human concept of what it means to have royalty in the world. And it's through our human concept of royalty, it's through that lens that we perceive the royalty of the divine. How do we relate to Hashem as Avinu, our parent? It is through our own experiences of our own parents and our own authority figures and our own religious role models that we shape our sense of what Hashem is as our parent. And as we become parents and grandparents as well, we understand the ways of Hashem more as Hashem being the parent of the world. And therefore, it's not unusual that you can find individuals who have complex relationships with authority figures and complex relationships with their parents who go on to have complex relationships with Hashem. On the other side, when parents as authority figures represent love and care and patience and joy, then it's sometimes the case that people brought up in that atmosphere associate the voice of Hashem to be a loving voice and a patient voice and a kind voice and a joyful voice. Our parents' voices, it is through them that we perceive the voice of Hashem. And we see another example of this with another first-time prophet in source number 6 in the book of Shmuel Aleph, where a prophet hears Hashem's voice in the voice of their authority figures. Vayikra Hashem el Shmuel. This is the very first time that Shmuel heard prophecy. Vayomer, and Shmuel said, Hineni, here I am. Vayaratz el Eli, and Shmuel runs to Eli, who is his authority figure. Vayomer Hineni, says, Eli, I'm here. Ki karatali, you called me. Vayomer, and Eli says, look, Arati, I didn't call you. Shuv shchav, go back to bed. Vayelech vayishkav, and he went back to bed. So Hashem calls out to Moshe. Moshe thinks he's hearing Eli. He gets out of bed, goes to Eli. Eli said, I didn't call you. He goes back to bed. Then we read. Vayosef Hashem kra'ot Shmuel. Then Hashem called out again, Shmuel. Vayakam Shmuel, and so it was, Shmuel arose. Vayelech el Eli, and he went back to Eli. Vayomer Hineni says, yes, I'm here. Ki karatali, you called me? Vayomer, and Eli says once again, Lo karati fani, I didn't call you, my son. Shuv shchav, go back to bed. And now the narrator tells us, Shmuel terem yadayet Hashem. You see, Shmuel didn't know Hashem yet. As a prophet, he didn't know him. V'terem yigalei elav devar Hashem, and the word of Hashem had not yet appeared to Shmuel, which is why Shmuel kept thinking he was hearing Eli's voice. Vayosef Hashem kra Shmuel b'shlishit, and then Hashem on the third occasion called out to Shmuel. Vayakom vayelech el Eli, and once more he got up, he goes to Eli. Vayom, and he says, Hineni, I'm here, ki karat Eli, he called him. And at that point, Vayiven Eli, it was Eli who understood, Ki Hashem koreh lana'ar, that Hashem was the one who's calling out to this lad, Shmuel. Vayomer Eli l'Shmuel, Eli said to Shmuel, Lech shchav, go back to bed, v'haya, and it shall be, Im, Yikareh elecha, if he calls out to you, Va'amarta daber Hashem, you should say, speak Hashem, ki shomea avdecha, for your servant hears, Vayelech Shmuel vayishkav bimkomo, Shmuel went, and he went back to bed. And so it was, Vayavo Hashem, Hashem came, Vayityasev, and he stood there, Vayikra kafam, kafam, and he called out, as he did on each occasion, Shmuel, Shmuel, mirroring the Moshe, Moshe. Vayome Shmuel, and Shmuel said, Daber, speak, ki shomea avdecha, for your servant can hear you. And so we see that it's Moshe, it's Shmuel, but the truth is, I believe that it's all of us. We hear Hashem in the voices of our fathers and our mothers, in the voices of our grandparents, in the voices of our teachers, and the voices of our rabbis. Our kindergarten teachers have such a huge responsibility in shaping in our minds what Hashem sounds like and what these scenes look like. It is through them that we perceive Hashem. And I find it fascinating as well that Moshe heard his father's voice, because we don't really know what Moshe's relationship with his father was like. How did Moshe know what his father sounded like? Moshe didn't grow up at home. Moshe grew up in the house of Paro. So to what extent did Moshe have a relationship with Amram? To what extent did Moshe recognize his voice? And surely, if you're out there in the wilderness and you hear Amram's voice, you'd be terrified. But obviously, it's not as scaring as hearing Hashem's voice. I think this is an amazing midrash to be studied on numerous levels. Now, Admin has asked a question in the chat. Admin, I don't know who you are, Admin, but it's an excellent question. And Admin has asked, if Moshe was in training, why do the Mefarshim teach that Moshe was punished for his response? Thank you for introducing what's going to come up in the next part of the shiur. So let's see what happened next. Admin is Avi. Oh, thank you, Avi Paluch. Okay, hi, Avi. Thank you for your question. So we're going to get there in a moment, because let's see what's happened next. I've made a very big deal of laboring this point, that Hashem comes to Moshe in the gentlest possible manner, because he does not want to scare Moshe. What happens next in source number 7 and the very next psukim? Vayomer, and Hashem says, Al tikrav halom, don't come any closer. Sal na'alecha me'al raglecha, remove your shoes from your feet. Ki hamakom asher ata omed alav admat kodesh hu, because the ground upon which you stand is hallowed ground. Vayomer, and Hashem said, Anochi Elokei Avicha, I am the God of your father. Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, the God of Avraham, the God of Yitzchak, and the God of Yaakov. By the way, this phrase, I am the God of your father, which comes before Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, is the hook in the text, which creates the space in the Midrash to say that there was a reference to Moshe's own father, Amram, here. So I'm the God of your father, Amram, also Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. How does Moshe respond to Hashem's gentle fire, angel, prophecy, gentle in his father's voice? How does Moshe respond? Vayaster Moshe panav. And Moshe hid his face, ki yareh mehabit el ha'elokim, because he was scared of looking at Hashem. So if this entire story starts with Moshe turning towards the snare, and Hashem sees Moshe turning, and that's what attracts Hashem to Moshe, to make him the shepherd of his nation, when Hashem reveals himself in the gentlest possible way so as not to scare him, Moshe then turns away. He shies away from looking at Hashem because he was scared of looking at Hashem. Now maybe, although Hashem did his very, very best not to terrify Moshe, any revelation of Hashem is that little bit scary. And Moshe didn't pass out like we did at Har Sinai, so at least Moshe's alive. But what's going on here? That Moshe is turning away. And this is significant if we compare this to Moshe 30 chapters later in the Torah, in source number 8. Because there we see Vayomar at that point, this is from our fast day, laning. Moshe says to Hashem, Hareini na et kvodecha, Hashem, please show me your glory. Moshe, at a much later stage of his career, when he has grown in confidence, he's grown as a leader, and he's grown in his relationship with Hashem, says to Hashem, please, I want to see you. Vayomer, Hashem responds, Lo tuchal lirot et panai, you won't be able to see my face. Ki lo yirani ha'adam v'chai, because nobody can see me and live. Vayomer Hashem, so what Hashem said was, Hinei makom eti v'nitzavta l'atzor, there's a place by me here, stand on the rock. V'haya bavo kvodi, when my glory passes, it shall be. V'samticha v'nikrat ha'tzor, I'll place you in a cleft in the rock. V'sakoticha pi alecha ad ovri, I'm gonna cover you over with my hand until I pass. Then for a moment, v'hasiroti et kapai, I'm going to remove my palm. V'ra'it et achorai ufanai lo yera'u, Hashem says to Moshe, you're going to see me from behind and you're not going to see me from in front. So Moshe receives a partial look at Hashem himself. Now, this passage deserves far more attention than we're going to give it tonight. What does it mean to see Hashem? Hashem doesn't have a body. What was Moshe asking for? What does it mean to see Hashem from behind instead of in front? But what we see is that later on, Moshe asks to see Hashem. Moshe wants to see Hashem. He's clearly grown by that stage. And when the opportunity then comes, Hashem says, I'm sorry, no. Hashem says, you can't look at me and live. You can only see me from behind. And the Midrash understands these two passages to be connected. And our question is in source number 9, was Moshe correct in turning away? When Hashem appeared to him at the sneh in the most gentle possible way at that important moment, did Moshe do the right thing by turning away? And there are different views in the Midrash. There are different views in the Gemara as well, but I'm bringing it from the Midrash because the Midrash comes before the Gemara. And we read in source number 9 at the top of page 3. Vayaster Moshe panav, and Moshe hid his face. Amar, Moshe said, Elokei avi omed kan, the God of my father standing here. Ve'ini mastir panai, I'm not going to hide my face away. Moshe says this is the natural response. It's almost as if, think of it as a form of a tachanun. You know, we daven before Hashem, standing up with our Amidah, and then afterwards we drop our heads in Tachanun. And the question isn't why do we drop our heads in Tachanun? The question should really be, where do we get the chutzpah to stand up before Hashem? Our natural position before Hashem should be the Tachanun position, which maybe justifies how before that we're able to stand up in a chutzpahdik way and just ask him for things. But Moshe says, Hashem is here, I need to hide my face away. And then we have 3 views in the Midrash. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, Rabbi Hoshaya, there's a disagreement between Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha and Rabbi Hoshaya. Echad mehem omer, one of them says, Lo yafeh asah Moshe k'sheister panav. Moshe did not do the appropriate thing when he hid his face. She'ilulei lo histir panav, because had Moshe not hidden his face at that moment, do you know what it means to see Hashem? Gilalo hakadosh baruch hu leMoshe ma'ala mata. Hashem would have revealed all the great secrets to Moshe, what's above and what's below. Umasha haya, that which has been, umasha atid lihiyot. All those great questions that we want to ask of Hashem to understand those impossible things in this world that we grapple with and we cannot possibly understand. Moshe would have understood everything. Seeing Hashem means understanding Hashem. And Moshe turned down that opportunity. Uvasof, and then later on, Bikesh lirot. Moshe asked to see Hashem. Shne'emar, as we saw, Moshe said, Hareini na et kvadecha, please show me your glory. Moshe says, Hashem, I want to see you. I want to understand you. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu LaMoshe, Hashem said to Moshe, Ani bati larot lecha, I tried to show myself to you. Vistarta panecha, and you hid your face. Achshav ani omer lach, now I'm telling you, Ki lo yirani ha'adam v'chai, a person cannot look at me and live. Now, Moshe, the answer is no. Kasher bikashti lo bikashta, when I offered you the opportunity, you turned it down, Moshe. You missed your chance. And so, It's either Rabbi Yeshua ben Kacha or Rabbi Hoshaya. One of them says that Moshe was incorrect. He shouldn't have turned away. He missed an opportunity. And Moshe learned to regret that mistake, because later on that opportunity did not return. And Moshe said, Hashem, I want to see you. I want to understand you. Why do good things happen to bad people? Why do bad things happen to good people? And Hashem said, I'm sorry. I tried to show you. You missed your chance. Now it's not an option. Now opinion 2 in the Midrash. V'am Rabbi Yeshua d'Sachna b'shem Rabbi Levi. Afal pichen heralo. We must note that while Hashem said to Moshe, you can't look at me and live, Hashem did still, at least partially, reveal himself to Moshe. Moshe did see Hashem from behind. Hashem did say, I will be gracious to those who I will be gracious to. I'll be merciful to those I'll be merciful to. Hashem does at least partially respond to Moshe's request. And whilst Moshe did not see absolutely everything that you can understand about Hashem, Moshe perceived more of Hashem than any other human being has ever or will ever perceive. So, yes, Moshe doesn't see Hashem fully, but he sees more than any of us will ever see. And Rabbi Yeshua d'Sachnin says it wasn't a punishment for turning away. B'schar, as a reward for Vayaster Moshe panav, Moshe hiding away his face. What happened as a result? V'diber Hashem el Moshe panim el panim. Hashem spoke to Moshe face to face. Uvischar kiyare, as a reward for Moshe being scared. What happened? Vayiru migesher elav. When Moshe came down from the mountain and his face was shining with glory, people were scared of Moshe. Uvischar, and as a reward, mehabit, from the word that Moshe was scared from looking. Utmunat Hashem yabit, Moshe was able to look at the form of Hashem. This opinion, the Midrash is saying that Moshe was rewarded for turning away. And as a reward for turning away, Moshe was able to perceive Hashem in this way. Which brings us to the third opinion, Rabbi Hoshaya Rabba Amar, Yafeh asa Moshe shestir panav. Moshe did well, he did the right thing to hide his face. Amalei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem said to him, Ani bati larot lecha panim v'chalakta li kavod v'istarta panecha. I came to show you my face, almost as if we were equals, that we could have this interaction. But you showed such great deference to me, such respect for me, and you hid away. Chayecha, by your life, Hashem says, Shata atid liot etzli bahar mem yom v'mem laila. You turned away. You're getting a 40 days and 40 nights with me in my presence, in a godly experience. Lo lechol v'lo lishtot, separated from the material world. You're not going to eat, you're not going to drink. And in the future, you're going to enjoy the shining glory of the divine presence. Shneimar, it says, as Moshe came down and he was unaware of the shining glory coming off his face. And now we come to Avi's question, which is a much stronger question now. Because Avi asked previously, why is Moshe punished for his response for turning away from Hashem? Well, we can now ask as well, that if it's the wrong thing to turn away from Hashem, why is Moshe rewarded? But more than that, what is Moshe's reward for turning away from Hashem? Moshe's reward for turning away from Hashem is seeing Hashem. How on earth does that make sense? That because Moshe turned away from Hashem, and because he spurned that opportunity, spurn is maybe a strong word, because he turned down that opportunity, Moshe's reward was to be given that very same opportunity, according to one opinion of Midrash, in the most intense possible way, 40 days and 40 nights, all included, full package stay with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with no food or no drink, a purely divine experience. What's going on here? Moshe turned it down, and the reward is to receive the very same thing. And I think it's a brilliant Midrash where there's so much we can learn from this one point. And I'd like to share with you two different approaches to this. The first approach is based on something I learned from Rabbi Moshe Taragin when I was in yeshiva, but I'm bringing it to you not from Rabbi Taragin, but from Confucius and from Shakespeare. Source number 10, it is said in the name of Confucius, real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. You see, we will never, ever understand Hashem. Anybody who thinks they understand Hashem is wrong. Anybody who speaks in the name of Hashem, Rav Amitala Rosh Yeshiva will tell you that if a rabbi comes along to you and tells you that they can explain absolutely everything in the world, run far, far away. Nobody can understand Hashem. And by definition, because we can only define Hashem in negative terms, Hashem is not a human. We can't say what he is, we can say what he's not. Then the definition of understanding Hashem is knowing that you cannot understand Hashem. And the more you understand that you can't understand Hashem, the more you understand Hashem. Moshe turned his face away because Moshe knew that he couldn't possibly perceive Hashem. And because Moshe knew more than any other human being that he cannot perceive Hashem, his perception of Hashem ended up being the most intense and clearest vision of Hashem any human being has ever had, because the way to understand Hashem is to turn your face away and acknowledge that you cannot understand Hashem. As Shakespeare says, I don't know if he had Moshe and the burning bush in mind, but Shakespeare said in As You Like It, Act 5, Scene 1, the fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool. There are very dangerous people out there who think they're very clever, and it's very wise to know your limits and to know what you can't know. Moshe knew what he didn't know, and Moshe knew the extent to which he didn't know Hashem more than anyone else, which is why the natural consequence for turning away from seeing Hashem was seeing Hashem on a much greater level. Let's call it a philosophical approach. But the second approach I'd like to share with you is from Rav Nachum Eliezer Rabinovich, which I discovered this week, which is a truly incredible approach. I see my mother-in-law is with us this evening, and Ariella has recently taken a liking to the teachings of Rabbi Rabinovich. He was the teacher of Rabbi Sachs. He was the president of Jews College in London and the Rosh Yeshiva of the Hesder Yeshiva in Ma'ale Adumim, and an exceptional Talmid Chacham, master of the world of philosophy, Canadian originally, major religious Zionist figure, prolific writer, very, very serious rabbi. So I'll share with you his approach to this topic in source number 12. Madua Moshe histir et panav. Why did Moshe hide his face? He explains as follows. Moshe hivin she'adam shero'eh b'tza'aro shel chavero. Moshe understood that when somebody sees their fellow suffering, v'alachat kama v'kama b'tza'aro shel Am Yisrael kulo, how much more so the pain of Am Yisrael as a whole, mitoch mabat kolel, if you look at it from a universal approach, from a broad, generalistic approach, alul, I think that was supposed to be la'abed, that person is likely to lose et enoshiyoto, their humanity. And I'll explain this in a moment. If Moshe, bimkom lirot et hatza'ar ha'ke'ev, instead of seeing the pain and the suffering, if Moshe would have had a vision of the bigger picture, and he would have understood that at the end of the day, in the bigger picture, when you see things from the divine perspective, this pain is actually positive. What would have happened? Then he would have lost his human heart. Moshe said, Hashem, I don't want to understand you because I don't want to feel comfortable with human suffering in this world. I don't want to lose my humanity. I don't want to see pain and suffering and tragedy and say, well, it's okay because I understand how it makes sense in the bigger picture. Hatofa'ah hazop shutav yudam ma'od. Rabbi Rabinovich says this phenomenon is straightforward and it's well known. A doctor is capable of seeing their patient crying out in pain without being in any way emotionally moved by the experience. Because the doctor knows that what can you do? This is part of the treatment. And that is what needs to be. And the doctor knows that it's what's in the interest of the patient. So the doctor can handle the patient's pain and not be moved by the patient's pain because he knows that it's what the patient needs. Moshe was scared of this psychological or emotional approach. Moshe Rabbeinu hu haro'eh ne'eman. Moshe is our trustworthy shepherd. Moshe did not want to become desensitized or apathetic to pain. I don't know if you saw, there was a video of Rabbi Sachs, one of his last recorded conversations before he passed away, where he was asked a question about human suffering in the world, and he answered along the same way of what Rabbi Rabinovich is saying here. And he said that Hashem doesn't want us to understand why bad things happen to good people, because if we understood, we'd accept it. And Hashem never wants us to accept bad things happening to good people in this world. Hashem doesn't want us to accept perceived injustices in our world. Hashem wants us to fight against them and not to say, oh, it's okay because it makes sense in the bigger picture. So what happens? Moshe is at the sneh. And Hashem says to Moshe, Moshe, you're going to be my prophet. You're going to bring my people out of Mitzrayim. Let me show you the bigger picture. Moshe says, I can't take that. I don't want to feel at home with that suffering and pain. And he turns his head away. Im kain, as a result. Maha yascharom shel Moshe. What was Moshe's reward? Tmunat Hashem yabit. Moshe was able to look at the form of Hashem. Now, Rabinovich pays very careful attention here. Moshe turned away from Elokim, the name of Hashem, which is Hashem's name of Din, and he was able to look at Hashem, Yud followed by Hey, followed by Vav, followed by Hey. He was able to look at Hashem's name of Chesed, of loving kindness. Kan lo mofia Shem Elokim is no longer the name Elokim, ela Shem Havaya. Moshe sees something else. Moshe turns away from Elokim, but he sees Hashem. Shem Havaya Metzayen Midat HaRachamim, which expresses Hashem's name of mercy. Letzedek ha'eloki yeshnam shnei tzadim. There are two sides to divine justice. Et midat hadin, Moshe lo zachar lahavin. Moshe did not merit to understand Hashem's din. Let's call it why bad things happen to good people. Aval zachar lahavin madu haresha'im matzlichim. He did get the answer to the question, why do good things happen to bad people? Zot harei kushya lo pachot kasha v'lo pachot ko'eved. That question is no easier and no less painful. So later on in Moshe's career, Moshe wants to understand Hashem. And Moshe says to him, please Hashem, why do good things happen to bad people? And why do bad things happen to good people? And Hashem says to Moshe, I tried to explain to you why bad things happen to good people. I tried to explain human suffering. You turned down that opportunity and you're not going to get that one back. However, I will partially explain my world to you, and I will explain to you why good things happen to bad people. Hashem says, I'm going to teach you about my chen and my rachamim, about my grace and my loving kindness. As a reward for Moshe being unprepared to look at and accept Hashem's justice, Zachar lahabit b'midat harachamim, he merited to look at Hashem's world of mercy. Labit letoch halev shel kol adam ulavin et shefa harachamim sheyesh ba'olam, to be able to look into the heart of every single individual and understand the overflowing emanation of mercy that there is in this world. And so Rav Rabinovich explains the scene. Moshe turns away because he wants to maintain that sense of sensitivity to injustice and pain and suffering in this world. And his reward was to partially understand Hashem, but he never received the bigger picture because that's something which he did not want to lose. And it's something which I think we can learn a tremendous amount from, because there is a tremendous amount of suffering in the world. And we need to, at the very same time as being able to say that Hashem is kind and Hashem is good and everything Hashem does for the good, that should never, ever desensitize us from the pain and from the suffering. And it should never prevent us from fully empathizing with those who are going through difficult times. And it shouldn't hold us back from doing absolutely everything we can to fight against injustice and difficulties in this world. And so I believe Moshe arriving at the snare was a key turning point in Jewish history. Moshe arrived at the snare because he turned towards the suffering of others, because he was empathetic and sensitive to the suffering of others. And then Moshe turns away from the snare for the very same reason. It is because he's sensitive to the suffering of others that he doesn't want it to be justified, and he doesn't want it to be explained, and he doesn't want to know why bad things happen to good people in this world, because I don't know what's better, justifying it or not justifying it, understanding it or not understanding it. Either way, the snare was a key turning point for Moshe and a turning point in Jewish history. And Bezrat Hashem, whatever suffering and difficulty there is in the world, we should be sensitive to it and empathetic and do whatever we can to fight it. And also hope that ultimately everything Hashem is doing is for the good. And we should get there, if not in this world, then one day to understand the ultimate kindness of Hashem. Shabbat Shalom to you all. I hope wherever you are in the world, you are safe and secure and you have a wonderful Shabbat.
Thank you. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much, really. Shabbat Shalom and good health
Shabbat
for all.
Shalom. Thanks.
Great.
Shkoyach, good Shabbos.
Shabbat
Thank
Shalom.
you.
Ali.
Shabbat Shalom.
Rabbi Mervis.
Thank you, Faye and Manny. Thank you, Janie, as well.
Yeshikach.
Rabbi. You're calling right now, and that she's in